Today's lesson will be covering task list item D1, identify the essential components of a written behavior reduction plan. This training program is based on the RBT task list and is designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for RBT certification. The program is offered independent of the BACB. Today's agenda includes covering an overview of behavior reduction plans, what they are and why they are needed, then covering the essential components that should be included in all behavior reduction plans, as well as going through a behavior reduction plan and identifying those essential components, and finally, a review of what was covered in today's lesson. As previously mentioned, first we will be covering an overview of behavior reduction plans. What is a behavior plan? It should be noted that behavior intervention plan is used interchangeably with behavior reduction plan. So a behavior plan is a written course of action. It is a plan for what to do to prevent challenging behavior and what to do when it occurs. A behavior plan should specify several things. First, it should specify any reinforcement system that is in place, as well as who's in charge of making revisions, and last, when the team will meet to discuss updates to the plan. So who is it that exactly needs an intervention plan? According to IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, a behavior intervention plan must be created for any learner whose behavior impedes their learning, or their behavior impedes the learning of others in their environment. Generally, behavior plans are useful anytime there are behaviors that we want to systematically decrease, such as yelling, noncompliance, hitting, etc., or behaviors that we want to systematically increase, such as participating, initiating conversations, or pretend play. Now we will move on to the topic of the essential components. First, we will watch a short clip about them, then we will go more in depth on each component. Tarbox and Tarbox listed 7 essential components for a behavior reduction plan to include. First, there needs to be operational definitions of target behaviors. These should be objective, clear, and complete, and can include examples and non-examples to help better identify what exactly constitutes as the target behavior. Second, a behavior reduction plan should include antecedent modifications. These are preventative strategies that should decrease the aversive properties of a task or transition, or even preparing learners about upcoming changes. Third is replacement behaviors. These are things that should be targeted with skill acquisition plans to allow the client a more appropriate way to gain access to functionally equivalent stimuli. Fourth, consequence modifications should be listed. These are response strategies that show those working with the client how to respond to a behavior once it has occurred in a way that will minimize reinforcement for challenging behavior, maintain a safe environment, and help the learner meet their needs by systematically teaching replacement strategies. Fifth, all behavior reduction plans should list the persons responsible. While this is often a team process, a point person should be clearly identified, such as the BCBA, a teacher, or a technician. Sixth, emergency measures should be identified if applicable. These include what to do if a problem behavior becomes too dangerous and the steps to follow in these severe situations. The final component is the function of the behavior. This should be derived from the results obtained in a functional behavior assessment. Some other useful information for behavior reduction plans to include is using clear and explicit language so others can easily understand descriptions and instructions. Provide examples when possible, and include a schedule for ongoing modifications to behavior plans. They should be updated and revised as often as needed, and at least annually or when circumstances such as changes in the child's environment occur. This could include a new teacher, a different school, a sibling being born, or even moving to a new town. Throughout the next few slides, we will be breaking down this written behavior reduction plan. This plan was written for a student, Lu Mu, and targets the behaviors of elopement and aggression. Listed here on the first page, you can see the behaviors, the assessment that was ran, data collection methods, and the beginning of the strategies to be used. On the second page, the strategies continue throughout, and on the final page, it has an implementation plan listed, as well as a space for all individuals who are involved to sign off on the plan. Now we will break down each component. On the left-hand side, we have listed each of the 7 components that Tarbox and Tarbox identified: operational definitions of target behaviors, antecedent modifications, replacement behaviors, consequence modifications, persons responsible, emergency measures, and function of behavior. The first component that we will be looking at is operational definitions of target behaviors, which you can see in this highlighted section. This behavior reduction plan has 2 target behaviors: elopement and aggression. Elopement is defined here as any instance where Lu leaves his seat or designated area over a distance of 3 feet without permission, which is asking to get up, leave, or be directed to do so. Aggression is defined as any instance of Lu hitting, kicking, grabbing, or pushing another person. Since the term aggression is pretty vague, they did provide several examples. However, it could be beneficial to have each of those behaviors defined, since there can also be some gray areas with each of them. For example, 2 people might see pushing another person differently. One person may see a 2-handed shove, whereas another person may include an instance where the child pushes past a person. So these should be defined more clearly if discrepancies occur. Now that we've covered target behaviors, we will next move on to antecedent modifications. Again, these are modifications that you can make to stimuli in the student's environment to reduce the likelihood that they will engage in the problem behavior. This is listed under strategies and specifically listed under antecedent, and it continues here onto the second page. Now we'll go more in depth on this. The first antecedent modification that was listed was the use of functional communication training. It states that Lou will be provided with visual supports to increase his use of appropriate ways of gaining attention. A picture of him raising his hand will be posted on his desk. Staff can gesture to it to prompt Lou to raise his hand. If he is not at his desk, staff should use a model. Written scripts will also be provided to Lou with the language he needs to gain attention. If Lou begins to physically touch someone or move away from his area, staff should immediately provide him with a visual cue. Now we'll move on to the second page of antecedent modifications. It goes on to say that if Lou responds to the cue, provide behavior-specific praise. If he does not respond to the cue, use least to most physical prompting. With all prompts that are used for antecedent modifications, they should be faded as soon as possible to avoid prompt dependency. The next antecedent modification that is listed is non-contingent attention. It states that a VI 15 schedule, meaning about every 15 minutes, a staff member will provide Lou with various forms of attention. By providing non-contingent attention, they are manipulating the MO for attention by using satiation. This will have an abative effect, and it will decrease those problem behaviors he would engage in to acquire attention. It will also decrease the reinforcing effectiveness of attention. So if Lou is engaging in an appropriate behavior, behavior-specific praise should be given along with upbeat social comments or statements. For example, I like how you're working on your math sheet. It looks like you're really good at addition. Keep up the good work, buddy. A high five or thumbs up could also be provided. If Lou is engaging in off-task behavior, provide a short neutral statement and use least to most prompting to guide him back on task. For example, if Lou is sitting at his desk, waving a pencil above his math worksheet, say something like, I see it's math time, and gesture to the worksheet. If needed, provide a visual cue to prompt Lou to request access to further attention. The last antecedent modification they list is staff engineering. Staff will maintain close proximity to Lou at all times. For example, he should not transition alone. Staff should shadow him within 3 feet. Staff will avoid making physical contact with Lou. If a redirection is needed, the staff member should do so using least to most prompting without making any verbal comments or facial expression. And during transitions, staff will fade distance by 1 foot every 5 days with 0 occurrences of behavior. Staff will fade no more than 3 feet from Lou. In this final example, they did a great job listing the criteria for fading. Again, the overall purpose of antecedent strategies is to manipulate the environment, which is the motivating operation or a discriminative stimuli, so that the client will be less likely to engage in the problem behavior. The next component that we will look at is replacement behaviors, which are listed in the behavior plan as targeted adaptive behavior for acceleration. This concept, which is differential reinforcement of an alternative response, is defined by Malat and Shane as stopping reinforcement for an inappropriate response while shifting that reinforcement to an appropriate response. The targeted adaptive behavior for acceleration, or the replacement behavior, is functional communication. This is defined as requesting attention by raising his hand and/or using an appropriate word or phrase, such as excuse me, calling a person's name, or asking for an interaction. Again, with differential reinforcement of an alternative response, this means that reinforcement will no longer be provided for the inappropriate responses, which were elopement and aggression, but will now be provided for the appropriate response, which is functional communication. This response should be included in this client's skill acquisition plan to be targeted. Next, we will be covering consequence modifications. This is listed under the heading of strategies and then more specifically covered under interventions. Consequence modifications are changes to what occurs after the target behavior occurs. It is a reactive strategy. The strategy they have listed for this behavior reduction plan is to use differential reinforcement of other behavior. This is defined by Malott and Shane as a reinforcer is presented after a fixed interval of time if the response of interest has not occurred during that interval. For this behavior reduction plan, it states, prior to the start of the day, staff will conduct a preference assessment consisting of various items and activities. Staff will assess Lou's preferences following each interval. Staff will then set a timer for 30 minutes. If the interval passes without Lou engaging in elopement or aggression, provide him with the identified item or activity paired with attention from a staff member or peer of Lou's choosing. For example, that was your timer. You can play Uno. Who would you like to play with? Lou may have access to this for up to 5 minutes. Should Lou engage in any of the target problem behaviors, the timer will be stopped and reset. Staff should show Lou the timer being stopped and reset without saying anything or making prolonged eye contact. The timer should not start until Lou is in his seat or area for 5 seconds without displaying any of the target problem behaviors. Use least to most prompting as needed. This plan did a nice job stating a strategy for increasing other behaviors using DRO, but also they did a great job explaining what to do if the responses do occur and how to consequate them. Next, a behavior reduction plan should include the person who is responsible. There are 2 sections in this behavior reduction plan that identified the persons responsible. The first page identified the teacher as well as the BCBA, and then there was a section at the end that had a place for all parties involved to sign off on the plan. Here, we can see the section from the first page on the left side where it identifies the teacher, Gen 10, the behavior specialist, DT, and the case manager, JV. The final page has a section for the following people to sign off on the behavior reduction plan: the parent, supervisor, behavior specialist, teacher, case manager, teacher assistant, speech therapist, physical therapist, occupational therapist, and a spot for other. It may be beneficial to directly identify a point person. However, since this intervention is directed towards the school, there may be many people who are involved in the implementation of this plan, hence the signature page. The next component that we will cover is emergency measures. It should be noted that no real emergency measure was listed in this behavior reduction plan, only an implementation strategy to increase effectiveness. So we will cover some different emergency measures after reviewing the implementation plan. The implementation plan states, consistency across settings is crucial in order to achieve effectiveness of any behavior strategies plan. Staff training on the specific components of this plan is necessary to facilitate accurate and consistent implementation. It is advised that the implementation of interventions and analysis of student progress be overseen by a board-certified behavior analyst. This section was included in the emergency measure because it does hit on staff training in order to facilitate accurate and consistent implementation. Since we are discussing behavior reduction plans, training is essential to ensure safety of all involved. Emergency measures in behavior plans may vary depending on the behavior. They can include things such as safety precautions, blocking access to streets for elopement, using protective gear for aggression, de-escalation techniques, as well as who to call in for implementing de-escalation techniques, restrictive methods that may be used and when it is appropriate to use them. This could include using restraint or penalty contingency where either the child is removed from the situation or access to items are removed, and steps or instructions for how and when to fill out incidents reports. The last component we will be covering is the function of the behavior. In other words, what was identified to be the cause of the behavior. The first page has this listed under assessments. Under assessments, it states, the assessment was based on direct observations in the classroom and various settings within the school. Frequency data were used to determine a rate of how often Lou was engaging and getting out of his seat, which was an average of 20 times per school day. A trial-based FA was conducted by manipulating variables in Lou's classroom during direct instruction and group activities. Based on the results of the assessment, the function of Lou's elopement and aggression present as access to attention. In short, it was determined that Lou is engaging in elopement and aggression to gain access to attention. This information is important to determine effective replacement behaviors and consequence strategies. Now we will move on to a review. Please get out your homework sheet and fill it out as we go over examples of the essential components of the behavior reduction plans. Question: what component is the following? Point person, counselor/LBA. A, target behavior. B, persons responsible. C, behavior instructor. Or D, consequence manipulation. On your homework sheet, fill in what component is the following. I'll give you some time to get that filled in. The answer to the previous question was B, persons responsible. It lists the point person, which is the counselor or LBA. I'll give you some time to get that answer filled in on your homework sheet. Question: what component is the following? Proactive strategies. Ensure SP is aware of the rules and consequences, both positive and negative. Respect what peers say, but don't rely on all reports to be accurate. If uncertain, ask SP what happened. Use language like, can you help me? Tell me more about, help me understand, or let's talk. A, emergency measure. B, function. C, antecedent modification. Or D, consequence manipulation. On your homework sheet, fill in what component is the following. I'll give you some time to fill that in. The answer to the previous question was C, antecedent modification. It lists the steps for proactive strategies, which again are manipulations to antecedents that will reduce the likelihood of the person engaging in the problem behavior. On your homework sheet, fill in C, antecedent modification. I'll give you some time to get that filled in. Question: what component is the following? Behavioral escalations. If SP is in the calming room and unsafe, and the vice principal is needed elsewhere, the vice principal will remain with SP. A, target behavior. B, persons responsible. C, protocol for safety. Or D, emergency measure. On your homework sheet, fill in what component is the following. I'll give you some time to get that filled in. The answer to the previous question was D, emergency measure. This component describes what to do if the behavior escalates to an unsafe point. I'll give you some time to get that answer filled in. Question: what component is the following? Hitting/kicking, using any part of arms, hands, or legs, feet to forcibly strike another person or object. And removing shoes. Student removes shoes with hands or feet when doing so is not a part of an appropriate activity. A non-example would be if the shoe accidentally falls off when running. A, target behavior. B, persons responsible. C, protocol for safety. Or D, emergency measure. On your homework sheet, fill in what component is the following. I'll give you some time to get that filled in. The answer to the previous question was A, target behavior. With the removing shoe operational definition, it includes a non-example to further clarify what target behavior they are exactly looking for. I'll give you some time to get A, target behavior, filled in on your homework sheet. Question: what component is the following? Interjecting/interfering when there is an altercation with another. Step 1, state the direction. SP, walk away. Step 2, warning. SP, this is your warning. You need to walk away. Step 3, cue to the calming room for 10 minutes. Walk to the calming room. A, antecedent modifications. B, replacement behaviors. C, consequence modifications. Or D, persons responsible. On your homework sheet, fill in what component is the following. I'll give you some time to get that filled in. The answer to the previous question was C, consequence modifications. It states what to do after the behavior of interest occurs. I'll give you some time to get that answer filled in on your homework sheet. This concludes today's training on task list item D1, identify the essential components of a behavior reduction plan. You can now take the quiz for this training.